So the EU is talking about admitting Ukraine into the European Union. Okay, so this is France, Germany, and Belgium, the other countries. And it's really, really retarded. So let me describe the reason why. Okay, so the European Union is an economic and really it's a political bloc. And Ukraine wants to be a member because it gets access to resources without trade barriers. It gets access to, that common market. I don't think they would allow them access to their currency because a country that's in war, they're going to print a lot of that currency, which is going to weaken the euro. So I don't think the European Union is that stupid to do that. But nonetheless, Ukraine is a really, really corrupt country. And it's going to siphon off resources from the rest of Europe. And it's about the last thing they need. See, Europe is in a lot of trouble. They have a demographic implosion because Europeans just don't have kids. I mean, they're way below replacement. And they don't have, they're running out of a tax base, they're running out of workers, they're running out of talent. Supposedly, this is what immigration was for, but the immigrants aren't exactly doctors and lawyers and scientists that they're bringing in. Ukraine wants to be a part of this, like I said, to access the economic, financial resources of Europe, but also in the hopes that they could be a part of NATO. Now, we're talking about the Ukrainian leadership here, okay, and not the typical average Ukrainian, which, by the way, probably wants an end to the war. They voted for Zelensky because they wanted to reconcile with Russia. That's what Zelensky campaigned on originally, which is no laughing matter. I'm just smiling at the stupidity of Europe, not the situation in Ukraine, by the way, okay? What's happening in Ukraine is very sad. And I feel really sorry for what's happening in Ukraine. It's being destroyed. It was a beautiful country, and it's being destroyed right now because of globalist policies and the Russian unwillingness to allow a threat on their border. So what's happening is incredibly stupid. So interestingly, the two countries that are opposing Ukraine being a part of the EU is, of course, Hungary. They're trying to oppose all the insanity that's going on right now from within. But you also have Poland, which is interesting on the surface because Poland has been one of the few countries that has really been pushing for, against what they call Russian aggression, pushing against as a bloc to impede Russia from being any kind of a power. But they're opposing this for a couple of reasons. First of all, economically, Ukraine produces a lot of the same stuff that Poland does. It just does it cheaper. So economically, it's not good for Poland. But also because the leadership in Poland is looking at the situation a lot more seriously. Poland wants to be a part of the West. They want to be a part of NATO, and they want access to the European Union, although it hasn't been all that great for them because they have to suffer under EU regulations, which is kind of hamstringing their economy. But, they believe that access to this market outweighs the costs. They're looking at it a lot more seriously, and the European Union is already in a very weakened state. Like I said, the demographic situation, but also because you've got political crises going on within and coming from without. You got issues with Turkey, you got issues with Russia, you got issues with immigration, you got issues with the United States and the Trump administration. You have, like I said, the demographic implosion, but you also have their financial situation is not easily manageable. When you have all these different countries under a currency union with different fiscal policies and different political agendas, the European Union is already skating on thin ice to begin with. You add Ukraine to the mix, that would be the death blow probably of the European Union. It's probably not long for the world anyway, but it's going to bring the EU down a lot quicker. If I were on the Russian side, I would laugh my rear end with the idea of Ukraine being part of the EU. That would hasten their collapse. It would then, under those circumstances, because without the European Union, European countries would have to compete. They would have to manage their own economies on their own, and because of that, they're not so much on the same side. NATO as an institution also becomes weaker because each country would be pursuing their own interests. So that would also involve their own national foreign policies, their own military policies. So then you would have competition within NATO. So with Russia, Russia is probably thinking, Putin thinks that this is just a fantastic idea. Yes, go ahead, Ukraine, be a part of the EU. Poland's looking at this and saying, well, we really want NATO and the EU to protect ourselves, against Russia, because Poland has been occupied by Russia quite a bit of its history. And the globalists in the EU are just absolutely retarded. So it's very interesting to watch. So this is an article from Zero Hedge, which I'll link in the description below.